Today's webinar will focus on school leaders as a key focus of Africa Union's Continental Education Strategy for 2026-2035. That is CESA 2026-2035. So we've had a lot today, but let us just maybe go through our agenda for this very short webinar. May I ask the tech team to just display the agenda for the benefit of those of us in-house and also for the online audience? Tech team. Apologies for the hitch. Thank you so much. Can it be bigger? Personally, I cannot see that. Thank you. So, as we can see, this is going to take 1.5 hours, and the introduction and setting of the scene will be done by the moderator, that is Yvonne Ruiz-Pamboya, who is speaking. And then we will have an introduction of key speakers. Again, I will be leading that. And then we will have keynote presentations on school leaders, a key area of focus for African Union Continental Education Strategy for Africa. And we'll have 2 keynote speakers. We will have Dr. Quentin Wardon, that's the Director, UNESCO International Institute for Capacity Building. And we'll also have Professor Steve Nkoecha, the Executive Director, Africa Federation of Teaching and Regulatory Authorities, AFTRA. The Q&A session will be led by 2 people. For the in-house, I will be coordinating that together with the people who are here. And then for the online, my colleague Marianne Dreas Shaika, who is the team lead and management consultant at UNESCO ICBA, will be leading that. We will have a reflection session, which will be led by Dr. Steve Kamanzi, Country Director and Chief of Party, EDC, Liberia. And then we'll end our session, hopefully, at exactly 5:30. Thank you, tech team. So before I introduce the keynote speakers, maybe just to remind us a bit of why school leadership is important. I know we've had a lot today. For those of us who are here physically, we've had of the good policies and practices in the 4 countries, that is Uganda, Tanzania, Kenya, in Rwanda. Oh, Uganda was not there, so Ghana. Yeah, Ghana, Tanzania, Rwanda, and Kenya. We've also had of a very interesting session about the models that are working and what others can learn from that. And we have also heard from the speaker about Ubuntu and how a person is a person because of another person. I think that really touched me. So, we've also heard or seen from various research that teachers and the quality of their teaching actually determines the learning outcomes of learners. The unfortunate bit is that more often than not, learners do not have access to qualified teachers who can guide them to attain their pedagogical support. So, the question that we ask ourselves, or why we are here as educators, as leaders, as policymakers, would be then, how best can we support the teachers? And to write on that, is leadership really important? I think we are all trying to figure that out. Is leadership really important? Is it vital for these teachers to be able to support children effectively? So for today, For today's webinar, we'll look at the Continental Education Strategy for Africa for 2026-2035. And we have a draft that has been finalized, and it's expected to be presented to the African Union Summit in February 2025 for adoption. And one of its key strategic areas focuses on teachers, educators, and caregivers, and it addresses issues related to recruitment, career progression, professional development, and overall well-being of teachers. So this does not only talk about salaries and benefits, but it also talks about leadership. It also talks about accountability. It also talks about mental well-being of teachers. So today, we are going to look at these recommendations, and I'm really hopeful that some of us sitting in this room and those of us online that were able to give recommendations towards CESA 2026-2025. So we're going to see what we have in it for teachers. We're going to look at the teacher and school leader policies, including pre-service education, continuous professional development, and licensure. So I would like to introduce our speakers for today. Our tech team, I hope you can share the bio for the speakers. I can continue, then it will come as we go along so that we also save on time. So we have Dr. Quentin Wardon, who is the director of International Institute for Capacity Building in Africa, which is a Category 1 UNESCO Institute on Teachers and Education Policy in Africa. Previously, he worked at the World Bank, including as lead economist, lead poverty specialist, and manager of the Unit on Values and Development. Before that, he taught with tenure at University of Namur. I'm not so sure. Forgive me if I pronounce that incorrectly. He also taught at Addis Ababa University, American University, and Georgetown University. He's a business engineering graduate. After an assignment in Asia as a laureate of a prize, he worked in brand management for Procter & Gamble. He then shifted careers to join nonprofit, working with the extreme poor. This led him to pursue a career in international development. Quentin holds a PhD, holds 4 PhDs, has over 700 publications, and has worked in policy across sector in over 60 countries. As part of his volunteer work, he has held multiple leadership positions with nonprofit. His research has been covered by leading news media globally. And the second presenter will be Professor Steve Koecha. Stephen Koecha is a professor of sociology of education at the University of Calabar, Nigeria. He holds multiple positions in Africa and globally in the regulation of teaching. These include 1, Executive Director, Africa Federation of Teaching Regulatory Authorities, AFTRA. Is the chair, International Working Group, World Forum of Teaching Regulating Authorities, AFTRA, and is the co-chair, African Union Teacher Development Cluster, a subsidiary of the African Union Continental Education Strategy for Africa. He's a lead consultant of the development and implementation of teacher policies, teaching standards, teacher qualification frameworks, and teacher education programs for international bodies such as UNESCO ICBA, UNESCO Paris, UNESCO Regional Office in Africa, African Union Commission, World Bank, European Union Delegation, Education International, DFID, among others. He's also a fellow College of Teachers London, fellow of AFTRA, fellow Nigerian Institute of Management, and member of Nigerian Academy of Education. Previously, he was the Director of Operations, Teacher Registration Council of Nigeria, and an agency of the Federal Ministry of Education, responsible for the regulation of teaching in Nigeria. Please join me in welcoming Quentin and Dr. Steve. Give them a round of applause. So I'll invite Quentin I saw him online. I hope he's still online.
Yes, sorry, I was unmuting myself, and let me put my camera
Good
as well.
afternoon, Quentin.
Can you hear me, Ivan?
Yes,
Can you
I
hear
can
me?
hear you loud and clear.
Oh, wonderful. Wonderful.
Welcome.
All right, thank you, thank you. And for anybody with a doubt, having multiple PhDs is a very bad sign. So it's a bad idea. All right, thank you, Ivan. So I recognize a few people. Jeff, I can see you there with the traditional haircut and everything. So very good to see you, and I can recognize a few other people. So glad to be with you. I think we have about 30 minutes for the keynote, and maximum 20 for me, and then 10 for Steve, whom I'm very glad is there. We saw him online as well. Am I sharing my PowerPoint myself, or you want to do it on your side? I can do it here if that's better.
Which one are you comfortable with, Quentin? We have the PowerPoint we can share from this end.
All right. I'll try to, but the host has to enable me for screen sharing, because right now I'm not enabled. So you can either share on your side. If I can see it, I can tell you, or I have to be allowed.
We can share. Tech team, kindly.
So right now, I don't have the right to share.
Just give us 1 minute, he's working on it. You can share, Quentin. Please go ahead.
Yes, I can. Thank you. Share. All right. Can you see my screen with the PowerPoint?
Yes.
Yes.
Wonderful. I'm trying to go full screen. All right. Hopefully this works. Thank you so much. And as I mentioned in several meetings, I'm very glad that VVOB and others are paying more attention to school leadership. I think it's extremely important. So my presentation is a bit broader than school leadership, and then Steve will really zoom in about the work of AFTRA on school leadership. So I'm going to talk about the CESA process. CESA is the Continental Education Strategy for Africa, as I think probably almost all of you know. We started at TICBA to help the African Union in the CESA process about 4 or 5 months ago. There are two parts in the process. First, there was a review of the previous Continental Education Strategy, which is from 2016 to 2025. That involved consultations, that involved a dozen online surveys that we fielded. I've put in the chat one of the surveys, I'll put it again when I end talking, which is for teachers, and we would love some of you either in the room or online to respond. It's very useful for the consultation. There was a technical consultation meeting, and the revisions are being done. So actually we finalized revisions. The next step is discussion at the African Union Specialized Technical Committee in early November, and then another round of revision, and then proposal for adoption at the African Union Summit. This is the first part of the process, the CESA review. So let me give you a few feelings for some of the results before I talk about what's more important, which is the new strategy. And anybody online, you should try to mute yourself because we can hear background noise here, if you can mute yourself, or perhaps the host can mute others. So first, we were actually pleasantly surprised that there is a relatively good awareness of CESA among the people who answered those surveys, about 1,000 people. We find that about 1/3 of the people didn't know anything about CESA. 1/3 knew something, and 1/3 roughly read it. But few people actually used the Continental Education Strategy 2016-2025 in their work in any substantial way. That was one first result. The second result is that the CESA was actually perceived relatively useful, and though with an average impact in countries. We thought, when we fielded the surveys, that the results would be less encouraging. And so we were actually pleasantly surprised with what we saw in the surveys. The most important constraint, of course, is the lack of awareness, because about 35–40% of the respondents do not know about CESA. And when you go down a little bit below the level of people who are responsible of specific areas in ministries or the heads of NGOs and so on, the level of CESA goes down. And we see that in some of the surveys that we just implemented. So there's a lot of effort that we have to make to try to make the next strategy better known. Now, lack of funding was also a main reason for the limited impact of the past strategy. Now, the past strategy had 12 objectives, and if you haven't read it, go online, you type CESA PDF Africa, you'll get the document. It had 12 objectives, and it has 69 action areas, and actually you could consider each of the action area as an objective. That's too much. That's too many objectives, too many action areas, and there was a feeling that there was not enough prioritization. And so what we have tried to do in the new CESA is restrict that a little bit. Now, one difficulty is that when you ask the respondents, again, this is about 1,000 people for different surveys, different groups, so it's not representative, but it's a good chunk of people. They all say that all of those 12 past objectives are very important, should be kept in the new CESA, right? But they also say that there is fairly limited progress in countries towards those objectives. And this is something, of course, that you would see in the indicators, whether you look at educational attainment, whether you look at learning, other measures, even public support for education, education spending as a share of GDP or share of total spending, you don't see a lot of progress. Now, the conclusion for the CESA review, and I went very fast because I want to spend a bit more time on the new CESA, but the conclusion of the CESA review is that there was a fairly good awareness among the people we contacted, which of course is a bit of a biased sample, but limited actual use of the strategy. The CESA was found useful, but had a limited impact in country, which is where things happened. It had important objectives, but limited progress towards those objectives. I didn't talk too much about the monitoring framework, but I talked about the 69 areas. That's too many. A monitoring framework was created to try to measure progress, and it didn't work because too many indicators were not measurable, or very few countries were reporting. The governance framework, I didn't talk much about it, but it didn't work very well either. A number of things were planned, and it proved very difficult to actually implement. There was mixed performance of CESA clusters, and some of you may be familiar with those clusters. These are 12 thematic groups where organizations meet. The clusters are led by the African Union, but you have coordinators, so we coordinate on teachers. And then you have typically 15, 20 organizations member. Some work well. I can tell you the teacher clusters works well, but some others don't work as well. This is important because that's a key way for the African Union to implement CESA. And then, of course, lack of funding was a key constraint. So these are the results of the CESA review. What is more important now is what are we proposing for the next 10 years? So the idea was to propose strategic areas and objectives. I'll discuss very briefly implementation and governance, and then a few pending questions. So this is not a done deal. We have a draft, meaning the African Union has a draft that will be discussed at what is called that STC in November. That's interministerial, and then there will be, if all goes well, a formal adoption of a final document in February next year. And that document is going to be the document for the next 10 years. That's why it matters. All right, so there is an investment case in the new CESA, which was not part of the previous CESA. It's very brief, but it talks about the importance of education for human rights, for benefits in the labor market, and for other types of benefits, taking into account, for example, girls' education, the impact on health, on fertility, on decision-making, etc. One of the things that we put in the investment case, which you might be finding interesting, is that literacy and foundational learning is very important, and we can measure that, even in the returns on the labor market. Now, this is the key slide. Now, this slide proposes to you, or shows to you, the structure of the new CESA. So we have 6 areas. So we went down from 12 to 6. What are those areas? One is very broad. Resources and enabling environment. The second one is teachers, educators, and caregivers. That includes, of course, the school leaders. Then we have three areas, I mean, the broad area is basic education, but we insist on foundational skills, socio-emotional skills and values and well-being, and finally, labor market-ready skills. Then you have higher education and TVET. Then you have second chance programs for those out of school and lifelong learning. And then you have gender equity and inclusion that kind of wraps everything else. Actually, we made a few slight changes in this, and I won't go into the details. This is the version before the revisions that we did about 2 weeks ago. Now, we have 20 objectives, and I want to go a little bit in details about those objectives to show to you how school leadership is integrated in these 20 objectives. All right, these are the objectives. So for each of the 6 strategic areas, we have 3 objectives. And then that gives you 18 objectives, and then we add 2 more for implementation and for monitoring and evaluation. So it's 20 objectives. So 20 is still a lot, but it's less than the 69 that we had before, right? So the first is a bit broad, resource and enabling environment. We talk about school infrastructure, we talk about the curriculum, and then we talk about evidence-based policies, governance, funding, and partnerships. That's, of course, very broad. Then the second one is the one that we care about for this meeting, is about teachers, educators, and caregivers. Now, there are 3 objectives there in that strategic areas. One is to improve teacher policies, education, and professional development. That is very broad. 2 is increasing the attractiveness of the teaching profession. And many of you may be aware of the UNESCO and Teacher Task Force report released this year showing that the profession is less attractive than it should be. And that has to do not only with wages and salaries, but also issues like mental health of teachers and other aspects. But then we specifically put an objective on investing in school leadership, and we specifically said, including the share of female leaders, right? Now, I don't know the shares in the 4 countries that are more represented here, that Yvonne mentioned, but in many countries in Africa, you have a small share of female teachers at the secondary level and an even smaller share of female leaders. Might not be the case in some of the countries that are currently targeted by the Africa Center for Excellence. But so you can see that school leadership is itself one of the 20 objectives, right? And so we wanted to give prominence to it. Then we go to basic education. So there's one thing about foundational learning, one thing about social emotional skills and health and well-being, and then finally something about labor market demand, responding to it, and we weave into that ICT and STEM or STEAM education. The next slide gives you the objectives for the other 3 strategic areas. So TVET and higher education, there is one about TVET, one about higher education, and we specifically also propose to have an objective on research, especially in education. And this matters because this is also one of the mission of the Center for Excellence in Leadership, right? Then we have second chance program that was not part of the previous one. And there we have some things for out-of-school children and youth. We kept adult literacy, which was in the previous one, and then we added supporting lifelong learning. And then we suggested to have 3 objectives for 1 gender, 1 equity, 1 inclusion, but that would be wrapped around the whole strategy, essentially. And I can talk more about that in Q&As. So now I want to briefly mention, for the next 5-6 minutes, one key point that is not part of the big structure of the new CESA, but that matters. And why, one of the reasons why we felt school leadership was so important, and especially female school leaders. So if you look at girls' education, there's a whole literature. Actually, I'm going to pass on these slides to save time. But there are programs that are really working, and the beautiful one in Nigeria that I can talk more about later, where you have a safe space, but then you also have strengthening on literacy and numeracy, and that really helps the girls to remain on school or back to school. Now, when you think about girls' education, and that's part of how we got to those issues about female school leaders, you may think that social norms is the main reason to drop out of school. It's not. It's an important reason. But, and I'm going to go very, very quickly, this is a slide where we have data qualitative on the left and quantitative on the right in Niger. And we took Niger for a specific reason, Niger has 75% roughly of the girls marrying before the age of 18. Lower secondary enrollment is very, very low, etc. You could think that in Niger, social norms is the key, but actually in Niger and in many other countries, lack of learning is the main reason to drop out at the primary and lower secondary school level, right? And that's also why we emphasize foundational skills. Now, when we did the analysis of PASEC data, and I assume you are familiar with PASEC, it's a student assessment, we found that female teachers, and especially female principals, were associated with a higher performance of the students, boys and girls alike, in school. And others have found the same thing with those data, with other data. I think it's a pretty robust finding for Africa. And so what this means is that having more female teachers, having more female principals is very important. Now, this I won't have the time either to go in details, but then we did an analysis for West Africa that now we have for Africa as a whole about how countries were creating career stages for school teachers and school leaders, what were the competencies for teachers and school leaders that were explicitly stated. And we find there's a lot of progress that has to be done. And again, we can talk about this in the Q&A. We also find, of course, a lot of unqualified teachers in many countries, and we could say a lot of unqualified school leaders. And I know that VVOB has piloted a few programs to train school leaders, both in service but also before they become leaders. And we found through this work in West Africa a number of other interesting programs, like the Gambia, for example, has a program where the school leaders, the aspiring school leaders, get 1 year of training in management paid by the Ministry of Education before they become school leaders. These are all interesting initiatives that we think should be encouraged. Now, let me then almost end. I think I may have gone faster than 20 minutes, but that may be good to have more time for discussion. So where are we in the CESA? The first draft was discussed about a month ago. We got 70 pages of comments, single-spaced, and we went through all of them. VVOB is one of the organizations that provided comments. We agreed on 6 broad areas, 20 objectives. One of them specifically about school leadership and specifically about school leaders within that. For each of those objectives, the CESA document, the draft new CESA, includes both a reason for the objective, why do we choose that objective, and then a discussion of some of the resources that are available to guide countries in implementing that objectives. And then we also have a little bit on monitoring and evaluation indicators. And I should say, and this is important, that for school leadership, we will need to create those indicators. They are not yet available. And if you want to monitor what's happening with the new CESA, we'll have to look at that. So I think I'm done. Hopefully not more than 20 minutes.
Will you join the meeting?
And Yvonne, I'm going to give you back the floor so that Steve can make his presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Quentin. Let us give him a proper round of applause. Thank you. I can see a lot of people drafting, so be prepared for a lot of questions. Allow me to welcome Professor Steve for the next session. Professor Steve? Prof, I believe you'll be sharing your own slides. If you have, I'm not sure whether you have slides.
Now, and I'm sorry I'm speaking to us. So, but I am so passionate about the issue of school leadership and quite honored to be one of the guest speakers. I just wanted to make it.
Professor Steve, we can't hear you.
Your remarks, not with slides. The network here.
Okay, we seem to be having a challenge with that.
I wonder if you can hear.
We cannot hear you. You keep breaking. Okay, so Professor Steve, what we will do is we'll go to question and answers first, as you try to find a location, that will allow you to communicate with us. So I believe my colleague Marianne is online.
Ivan, I think Steve's connection is better now, no? Steve, can you speak?
Okay, that is better. It's fine.
Okay, then you have the floor, Steve. Please continue. Hello? We cannot hear you.
Steve, you are muted, I think, on your mic. We can see that.
You wanted me to continue, Dr. Quentin?
Yes, please continue. If you have a connection, that is good. Please continue. Yep.
It's just breaking up. So, but I don't know if you can hear me. I want to say about school leadership in Africa. I have done a great deal.
Oh boy. Steve, we lost you again.
All right.
Okay, Quentin, I think we'll just go ahead with the Q&A for now, and then
Can I just say one or two things?
Work with Dr. Quentin on that.
Okay. Yeah, Steve, you are breaking. So I'm not sure it will work if you make a 10-minute presentation. You will break. Maybe I can mention a few things about what you are doing because I have a better connection. Would that be okay?
Some of the frameworks that African Union has learned about is the Continental Framework of Teaching Standards. Framework of.
Let's remove him.
Just mute him.
Then he summarizes what he does. Then we move on.
Okay. Yeah. So you remove.
All right, Ivan, what do you want? What do you want to do? So I can try to say a few things for Steve. Yeah, go ahead.
Yes, please. I think you proceed. Also because of time.
Okay. So let me try to mention. I mean, Steve would speak much better about this, right? But he breaks. Connection is bad. So let me try to say a few things that I know he has been working on. There is currently a project being launched by AFTRA for an Africa-wide school leadership licensing scheme. And I think that's a key part of what he would have wanted to convey. So what does that mean in practice? And we are happy to think that through with all of you. So the idea is that existing school leaders would be able to take courses online, and the current intention is that IGBA will work with AFTRA to design those courses and take an examination on a number of areas that would cover what we believe school leaders should know. So this would cover a lot of topics, right? Of course, leadership practice, leadership styles, and so on, but also things which are much more specific, like gender responsive pedagogy, or how to make school inclusive, how to manage a school's budget, lots of different things. We haven't yet defined what exactly those modules would be, but this will happen within the next few months. And we have a few requests from specific countries to also help them design those courses for school leaders. In some cases, it is existing school leaders, so it is continuous professional development. In other cases, it is people who are teachers who want to become school leaders. And so we will have an examination that will be administered online for the school leaders to be able to be certified. And because of AFTRA's convening power, what we hope is that countries will then recognize that school leadership licensing, if you will, at the Africa level, so that school leaders also may have an ability to have mobility. Now, we also want to make sure that this is done, and when I was hearing Steve, he said a few things like that this is done within the frameworks that the African Union has, and we can strengthen some of those existing frameworks. So we wanted you to know that because it's going to happen within the next few months, and potentially this could be launched by the end of the year. The idea was to try to prepare this still within the African Union Year of Education. Let me stop here, and I'm sorry that I talked for Steve, but he was breaking, so maybe it was easier for me to mention that. Back to you, Yvonne.
Thank you so much, Quentin. Please let us appreciate Dr. Quentin. It is not easy to stand in someone else's shoes. I think someone here said that the wearer of the shoe, no, right? Pinches, right? I don't know whether I'm using it correctly, but yeah. Okay, so we're going to go into Q&A, and I'll give the first opportunity to those of us who are here physically, and then we'll cross over to our colleagues online. So I think we'll just take 3-4 questions, and then we'll move. Faye, Dr. Faye, may I disturb you and ask you to mark for me? So it'll be the first one. I don't know where okay, the second one. Gender balance. There's no gender balance. Okay, she'll be the third one. Okay, we'll go with those 3 for now.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank
you, Doc, for the presentation. I have one question. Per your presentation, you mentioned that one of the key challenges to the implementation of the CESA 2016 to 2025 was as a result of lack of funding. So my question is, moving to 2026 to 2035, what contingency plan is put in place to address this gap so that after 2035, we'll not come back to say we could not implement because of lack of funding? If you are able to help me on that, that would be very grateful. Thank you.
Thank you. That's a great question. We'll take all of them first, Quentin, and then you will respond. Who was the second one? Yes, right here. Oh, you know, in class we have people who, they cut cues. Even here I see some. He was the second one. So I'll come to you. You are the fourth one. I'm a teacher. I look. Please go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much for a good presentation concerning with the Continental Education Strategy for Africa. I think that is the CESA.
Yes.
Yeah. So my concern is in one of the slides or presentations, which is earmarked on gender representation in African leadership. Myself, I support that there should be some sort of gender balance in education and leadership, that men and women should take positions in leadership. But it is so wonderful that somehow we overemphasize, that we put much emphasis on women representation in education and leadership, while the purpose is to balance the gender. So how comes that we take that initiative while the purpose is to balance them? And we are the Africans, so we should ask the several questions in this area. What do we need in education? What are the specific needs? And we are talking about the African, we are talking about the school leadership in Africa. So do we need female leadership, or we need the school leadership which is effective? So I think this area should be well articulated so that we can do something which we need rather than emphasizing something which is maybe taken from outside or done by somebody interested. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Those are two great questions. We'll have someone at the back. Yes, please go ahead.
Yes, thank you very much. I had a question.
We can introduce ourselves.
Yes.
Someone on the
Online. My name is Laurent, and I'm a strategic education advisor working with VVOB in Rwanda. Thank you for the very focused presentations. I had a question regarding the initiative, the second presentation, the initiative that is being introduced regarding training, professional development for school leaders, and linking that to a licensing approach. I think, well, today here in person, we have explored some ongoing initiatives that certain governments, ministries of education already have regarding continuous professional development for school leaders and linking that to a school leadership license. So my question is, how do we see that alignment with like an African-based course? And have you done an exploration how these programs could align regarding the content, the contextualization, and what it means in terms of the different licenses that school leaders can then obtain, and how to then frame it for school leaders in Africa, the different options for them in terms of professional development. Thank you.
Thank you, Lorian. Another great question. You had a question?
I think it sent us on the same. My name is Bartholomew Lumbasi. Just on the same, in the same vein on this element of school leadership licensing scheme. What happens with the existing terms of employment that vary from one country to the other?
Thank you so much. Dr. Quintin, I think we can take that for now. I'm hoping that Steve can also be able to respond. Dr. Quintin, over to you.
All right. So I noted 4
Dr.
questions,
Quintin?
I think. So, yes, can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, we hear you now. Please go ahead.
All right, wonderful. So I think there was a first question about lack of funding, right? So there are 2 answers here. One, of course, is that the strategy will advocate for more investment in education by countries, which is where the rubber hits the road. There are different ways of doing that, but that's one of the aims, and there will be also a stronger effort at communications and dissemination of the new CESA. Now, for the African Union itself, there is an issue as well that, for example, many of the CESA clusters mention lack of funding as a reason why they're not sometimes operating as well as they could or should. I think what is proposed actually is that there is a mechanism to try to fundraise for those CESA clusters to have some resources that will enable them to have a larger impact, right? I mean, recall that these clusters are typically 15, 20 organizations, some large, some smaller, that work on a very specific topic. There are a dozen CESA clusters right now, and so they can really help share knowledge across countries, organize events, and so on. And so we need to make sure that at the level of the African Union as well, there is a mechanism that can support those clusters for them to be more effective. But of course, the broader lack of funding at the country level, all we can do is advocate for it, but with good data. That's why the CESA has an investment case in it, because we hope that it will be read not only by the ministries of education, but also by the ministries of finance, for example. So that's on the first question. On the second question, so the point is not to impose a gender aspect from outside. The point is to recognize a few facts, right? First, our research and the research of others suggests that when you have female teachers and female school leaders, there is stronger performance by boys and girls alike. That's very important. Now, our own research that we are going to release formally in a few weeks tries to also explain why is this like that, right? And when we look at the data, we have some insights into why. So, for example, women teachers are less likely to have a second job. Why? Because they're less likely to be poor. Why? Because they were typically more educated and therefore were probably able to marry a husband who also has relatively good earning powers, and that makes a huge difference, because if the woman does not have a second job like more men have, she can focus more on the teaching. Perhaps also the responsibilities at home play a role. So there are different things that we can look at. Now, what's also very important is that apart from the fact that women are associated, this is not an RCT, it's an association, econometric association, that women are associated with better performance for the children. There is a big benefit for states, for countries, to hire more women when they are a small minority. Why? Because women tend to stay as teachers longer. So we have data on that as well. Men, if they get a better job or a better earnings, are going to leave teaching and go somewhere else, right? So the attrition rate for women may be lower, right? So there are lots of benefits from doing that. And what we are doing in addition is also trying to understand what are the barriers that women feel for being a teacher or being a school leader. For example, we have a very nice small survey in Uganda that tells us some insights about what some of those barriers are, right? So there's a whole agenda there, not to have necessarily more women than men, no, but to have more balance, which then also has a lot of benefits for women serving as role models for girls to continue their education, but also to quantify what are the benefits for learning, what are the benefits for reduced attrition, what are the benefits for A, B, C, D, E. So these does not come from outside, it comes from the African data and African practices. And we have, in several countries, good practices for women to be teachers or for women to be school leaders. Then there were two questions about the school leadership licensing. So maybe what I'll do is not respond. Let's see if Steve is there and if he heard the questions, and then let Steve respond, and then if Steve cannot connect properly, then I will respond.
Over
Steve, are you still there? Mm-hmm.
Hello, Steve. Okay. Quentin, I'm informed he's not online. Please continue.
Oh, he's not online. Okay, maybe he had the connection was maybe too bad. Sorry about that. So let me try to respond, right? So the Africa Licensing Initiative for School Leaders is an initiative with 4 partners. So there is AFTRA, there is UNESCO ICBA, there is Education International, and there is the African Union, right? So we have still a lot of work to do. We are aware, of course, of some of the licensing mechanisms that exist in different countries. What we need to do is to draft a much more detailed concept note and what would be the coursework that the teachers would need to take to become school leaders, or existing school leaders would need to take, and those would be different, probably slightly. And then have a clear view about how do we test very practically those competencies, right? But this is not going to replace any of what is happening at the country level. At the country level, countries will continue to have their own systems. What we want to try to do is to have something that becomes a reference at the continental level that then countries can also, if they would want, take inspiration from. But of course, we will also take inspiration from what exists at the country level. And then the last question, I'm not sure because I didn't take good notes here. What again was that was a gentleman, what he said. Maybe we can ask him again. I remember what the person from VVUB said, but I didn't take good notes for the last question.
That's okay, Quentin. Maybe we can ask Mr. Lumbasi to go again, if you don't mind.
Thank you so much. My name is Bartholomew. The question was on school leadership licensing scheme, what will happen because of the existing terms of employment that vary from one country to the other as regards the engagement of the school leadership?
Right. So I mean, the Africa licensing does not affect what's happening in the countries. Right? Countries have the autonomy to do whatever they want. Right. What we hope is that this is an additional licensing that can have two beneficial features, right? One beneficial feature is for the teacher or the school leaders who gets vetted, if you will, right? That can help potentially the teacher to be able to teach in another country. And you know that there is a whole mobility protocol for teachers produced by the African Union. So we want to encourage, when that fits what people want to do, that mobility of countries. You have huge shortages of teachers and school leaders in some countries, and you have actually a surplus in other countries, right? Having that market function better would be one of the potential benefits. And so it's not neither affecting the terms of contracts of what a school leader needs to have in a specific country, right? But so we hope that it can help potentially for a bit of mobility, but then we also hope that many countries that do not currently have proper career tracks for school leaders. We know that many countries do not have it, that do not have well-defined professional standards and competencies for skilled leaders, right? That they can take inspiration from the Africa-wide licensing idea and adapt that to what they need in their own countries, right? But let's not dream, right? I mean, we hope to provide that service, create the licensing, but we don't expect thousands or tens of thousands right away to take those exams. No, but we want to create that so that it can also become a reference for countries across Africa. I hope I answered your question.
Thank you so much. You've answered the question, but with a mix of one, there is the element of the teacher mobility from one country to the other, which is already provided for within the qualification frameworks and the mutual recognition as per the protocol set up in the AU. But right now, we are talking about school leadership, and the challenge of even just moving from one country to go and provide leadership in a school in another country also remains in question, but I think it's a subject that we are going to discuss further. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think, if I remember correctly, Dr. Quentin also said that we are open to suggestions on how this can be. It's still, I would call it, in the pot. We are still trying to see whether we are boiling it or we are frying it or we are roasting it. So it's still very raw. So getting your suggestions on how best we can go about this, I think that is much welcome and will be highly appreciated. I don't know whether there's one more burning. If you have an extremely burning question before we move to the online. Okay, we have one more, just that one, and then we move to online.
Thank you, Prof. From your presentation, I noticed as you are concluding the previous plan, under the conclusion, there was an aspect of implementation of governance framework. And you indicated that it was not implemented, non-implementation of the, were there peculiar reasons which resulted into the non-implementation of the framework? And then it also appeared again in the proposed plan on matters governance. What are some, if it is there, what are some of the measures that have been put in place to ensure that it is finally implemented?
Thank you so much. That's
right.
a great question. You have a follow-up question?
Yes. So there was a governance framework that was adopted for CESA 2016 to 2025, right? And some of it worked relatively well. I think we got pretty good feedback for the CESA clusters, for example, even if some are not working very well. The cluster mechanism was found very useful. But then there were other things that were not implemented very well. There was an ambition to create a CESA journal. There were just a few issues. There was an ambition that CESA would be driven by a committee of 10 heads of states. That didn't work too well. There were a number of different things. Taking that into account, there are very, very specific proposals that were made for the governance of CESA 2635, the next 10 years. So there is a steering committee. It is not at the level of heads of state. It is at the level of ministers of education with representations from the 5 regions, people nominated for 3 years and then turning, ministries can also have their representatives there, so that it's a slightly lower level, so that it actually will function and people will attend and so on. Then there is an operational committee, which has a very different function. And then there are 5 subcommittees from the operational committee with very specific responsibilities. So it's a bit more precise, it's a bit more operational. And there are a number of other things that we recommend in terms of implementation. So there should be a midterm review. That didn't really happen with the previous strategy. There was a partial midterm review done after 10 years, essentially. There should be a stronger reporting mechanism, not every year, because that won't work, but every 2 or 3 years, we suggest how that can be done. So there's a lot of, I mean, it's just a few pages, but it explains clearly what could be done to make a strong implementation structure at the level of the African Union, and also monitoring. On monitoring, it's much more tight, so the number of objectives is smaller, and for most objectives, the leadership one is a bit different, but for most objectives, there are clear indicators that we can already use, which are aligned with SDG 4, which makes it easier. One of the recommendations that was made when we had the review of the draft was that there should be focal points in the ministries, CESA focal points, and in the regional economic communities. So that would help a lot for bi-directional information, right? So that the African Union can provide information on what's happening at the continental level and so on to the regional communities and to the member states in an easier way, but it can go the other way as well. And so those focal points are clearly specified as well in the strategy as one of the key mechanisms to have better coordination. Now, whether all of this would work, that remains to be seen, but it's a bit more precise, it's a bit more detailed than what we had before, and it's put down at a bit more operational level as opposed to just the broad strategic level. So I hope that helps a little bit to explain the intent, at least of what is in the strategy.
Thank you so much, Quentin. Now we move over to online participants. I welcome Marianne. Marianne will have at most 10 minutes for the online Q&A. Are you online?
Yes. Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, thank you. You're welcome. Please introduce yourself and then you can proceed.
Yes, hello everyone. My name is Marianne Dreas-Sheikha, and I work with the KICS Africa 19 Hub team from UNESCO ICFA virtually. I'm an education consultant and former teacher. And in fact, I used to work in school leadership too. So I want to thank Quentin and also Steve, although he wasn't able to speak directly, for their presentations. There's been a lot of interest in the chat box from our attendees who are tuning in virtually today, and some great comments too. And some of them are even sharing resources and links to studies. So I think what I can do is raise 3 specific questions, and then there's a couple of hands. So maybe if we have some time, we can get to the hands next. But those of you that are raising hands, like Damaris, Jose, and John Balamara, maybe you could type your question in the chat box so we can get to them more quickly. So is it okay, Yvonne, if I ask 3 direct questions and then we take it from there?
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay. So I want to first raise one from someone named Oswell Hapanyangwe. Hope I said it right. They are asking whether or not we have found out the reason for the low awareness and the low implementation rates of the first phase of CESA, and whether there'd be any way to address this in the new phase. So how can we increase the awareness and of the strategy, and also the implementation and the impact rates. So that's one question about what have we learned from the old and transferring to the new. A question from Leslie Ketsley-Hebert. She's asking whether there is a cluster for the second chance learning, so second chances for students, and what can be done about that. So whether CESA has a second chance learning cluster. And then thirdly, we have somebody from Uganda, Juliet, who's asking, raising the issue of school dropouts amongst girls and lower levels of lower levels of school, saying that usually it's because they lack sanitary pads, and they not necessarily because of poor learning outcomes, but because of their gendered status, and limited access to bathrooms and sanitary pads. Does CESA have anything to say about that? What can be done about some of the unique challenges that girl students face, and whether there's any comments from the strategy on that? Can we begin with those three questions? I'm happy to repeat them if need be.
It's very clear.
Thank you so much, Marianne. Over to you, Quentin.
All right. So the first question on the low awareness and limited implementation, right? So awareness, this is something that we can help. We can help the African Union make sure that CESA is well known. So there's again a small discussion about that and what could be done at the launch of CESA and what could be done after CESA has been launched, so that there is stronger awareness of it in the countries. We hope also that the document will be found more useful because, again, for every single one of the 20 objectives, there is an explanation of why does it matter, then references to 5 to 10 pieces in the literature that could be useful for countries, and then a discussion about how you actually monitor outcomes. All of that was not part of the previous CESA, so that's the new CESA. But indeed, I mean, the African Union and countries will need to have efforts to promote awareness of the new CESA, especially if it is adopted in February. And many organizations, us, VVOB, others could help for that. On the issue of, is there a cluster for the second chance learning? No, not currently. So currently we have 12 clusters, which are broadly aligned, although not exactly aligned, with the 12 strategic objectives of the previous CESA. The objectives are changing, and our guess is that there will be a realignment of the clusters. And there could be an incentive to have slightly less clusters. I mean, there will be 6 strategic areas for the new CESA. There is a benefit of having slightly larger clusters so that they have more resources, they are better managed, and so on. But then with subcommittees for objectives within those clusters. So, but that is a decision that the African Union has to make, and that decision will not come now. It will come only after the potential adoption of the new CESA in February. And if that's the case, then there might not be a cluster specifically for out-of-school children, but there might be a cluster for the issue of second chance programs and lifelong learning. And within that, there would be 3 objectives. So there could be 3 subcommittees, for example, in one cluster. So this is all to be discussed, but has to be discussed after adoption of the strategy, how we implement the cluster mechanism. There is a clear understanding that we need to keep the cluster mechanism because it's a low-cost way to coordinate action by many, many different stakeholders. And then on the question from Uganda. So of course, yes, sanitary pads and other issues matter for girls dropping out. But if you ask a typical person working on girls' education, and I've done that in many meetings, what's the main reason for girls dropping out? They come up and say, first, social norms, and then issues like sanitary pads and others, right? But what's very important to understand is that at the primary level, and at the lower secondary level, where sanitary pads are less important, right? Certainly at the primary level, right? There, the main reason for dropout is lack of learning. And that comes from the parents and quite detailed work with parents being able to choose among many, many different reasons why the boy or the girl dropped out. And when you have dropped out at the primary level. You know that the completion rates are very low in Africa, right? And even lower at the lower secondary level. So if we forget that and focus only on what matters, which does matter for the adolescent girls who are a bit older, we lose an opportunity, right? And the argument, and that's in the Girls' Education Report, we can make that available to you. It's published, that was released at the African Union first Pan-African Conference on Girls' Education. The argument is, yes, social norms matter, yes, pads and other things matter, but don't forget to improve learning, because it's a lack of learning that is responsible for the largest amount of dropouts for boys and girls alike, while the other things matter for at a slightly later stage, but when you have only in many countries 20 or 30% of the girls still in school, right? So we have to do both. So of course I'm not contradicting what you say. The paths and other things are important, but let's not forget about the lack of learning as a key issue. And that was leading to the argument that because women, for a number of reasons that we can explain at least in part, tend to have a positive association with learning, and because they are underrepresented and then cannot serve as role models for girls, we need to increase the share of women, especially in leadership, in the countries where that share is very low. In some countries, in high-income countries or upper middle-income countries in Africa, more women are teachers, and sometimes women as school leaders. But in the low-income and lower middle-income countries, typically the women are underrepresented in teaching at the secondary level and in school leadership. Back to you.
Thank you, Quentin. Marianne, over to you.
Yes, Quentin, thank you. I think that your responses were clear, and I hope so for the online audience. There have been a couple of more questions, I think, even responses to what you're saying now that have been coming up. Do we have a few more minutes, Yvonne, for maybe 2 more questions?
Yes, so I think we have about 5 minutes.
Okay. Okay, I'll try to pick some of the best ones. There is one question from Jose Decpo. The question is related to the dropout rates of students. Whether or not the unemployment of educated youth in a country is, whether or not it's being considered as one of the factors heavily influencing school dropout rates, other than the lack of learning that you're discussing, Quentin, but whether or not the relevance or usefulness of education is seen as one of the factors influencing dropout rates. So education and employment, the link. And one more question, pick the best one. A question on, to what extent school leadership goals can even be aligned with broader educational policies and CESA. So I think just maybe more trying to make CESA more well linked to school leadership goals, where the two worlds might be seen as somewhat separate at the policy or systemic level, and then the leadership level at a school and even in the classroom. So maybe more of a link there that can be made. There were other questions, but maybe we'll have to start wrapping it up. Let me know if there's more time, Yvonne, but those are the 2 that I think I can ask now. Thank you.
Thank you, Marianne. I think that will just be enough for today. Over to Quentin. Dr. Quentin?
Right, so on this question of learning and other factors leading to dropout, right? So the data is for 10 African countries, Francophone ones. So it might be slightly different elsewhere. Parents are asked, why did your child never go to school? Or why did your child drop out of school? There are 17 reasons for the dropout that can be chosen. So we are able to see somewhat precisely what's related to lack of learning, what's related to non-interest in schooling, which may be because labor market returns are too low, what's related to social norms, what's related to accessibility of the schools, are there secondary schools nearby, for example, and things like that. And so we can look at that in details. We have 2 years of data, so we can check for the robustness over time. And so what I'm saying is that on average, across the countries, at the primary and lower secondary level, the main issue for dropping out is lack of learning. The other issues also play a role. When you go to upper secondary level, that becomes a bit different, especially for girls. At the upper secondary level for girls, social norms play a huge role, right? Parents saying, oh, it's a girl, or parents saying she was pregnant, or whatever it is, right? And what I'm talking here is about averages, right? It's actually different in each country, right? In some countries, the issue of the cost of schooling comes out very strongly. In other countries, not the case, right? So we have to be a bit careful. But I wanted to emphasize the issue of learning because it linked to the teachers and it linked to the school leadership. And it's something that sometimes we forget to mention clearly, that we have to improve learning to improve educational attainment. But other factors matter and it changes between countries. The other question was about the link between school leadership and CESA. Well, school leadership was mentioned, but not as strongly in the previous CESA. Here is mentioned very strongly in the new CESA. And of course, in the new CESA, we try to discuss the links, but the document cannot be more than 50, 60 page long when it's going to be formatted. So we have limited scope, right? But we are going to do companion pieces, or we hope so, once we know that the strategy is on track for approval. And so there would be one piece on school leadership. And if some of you want to help with that, you can contact me. The last thing I want to mention has nothing to do with the questions. I just want all of you to know that for World Teachers Day, we are organizing a large event at the African Union, which is in person and hybrid, so you can participate. There will be 4 sessions, one on teacher policies, one on teacher well-being, one on teacher practices, and then one on teacher training. And Jeff, Faye, and so on, I think I shared with you those things, but I can resend it. If you can share it with the participants, feel free to come online. You have to register to participate online, but you can listen to one session and not the others. We have very good speakers, and so I hope that some of you will be there, and the issue of leadership, school leadership, will of course be discussed at that event. We are organizing the event on October 3rd, which is I think next Thursday, because October 5th is Sunday. Right? And then the last thing I want to mention, perhaps one more thing, is that we are providing guidance to a few countries about teacher awards. We also believe that there should be school leadership awards. And if you want some reflections about how to go about this, we have some materials that we can share. So let me stop here, unless there is any other burning question. And Ivan, I'll send you the links again and the materials for World Teachers Day in case some people want to join. And I've put in the chat the link again to the CESA survey on teachers. If some of you have the time to fill it, it takes you 15, 20 minutes, and it helps. Because it gives an idea about what you believe should be the priorities, including for the new CESA. So it does matter. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Quentin. Please let us give them a... We are tired. Very. Can we give them a proper clap, kindly?
I can't hear it, so it doesn't matter. But I'm glad well, thank you again for this opportunity to talk to all of you. Thank you.
Thank you. So I will call Dr. Steve Kamanzi for a reflection. Dr. Steve is the Chief of Party and Country Director of Education Development Center, EDC, in Liberia. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't have 4 PhDs, though. Yeah, but we really appreciate the panelists, the keynote speakers, Dr. Quentin, and we couldn't follow his fellow panelists, but we were able to cover, I think, most of what we were supposed to cover today. Just want to share a few key reflection points. I think one thing that is coming out from this session and the presentation is, again, for me, it's an encouragement and a reminder that we are doing the right thing, right? School leadership, and seeing that it's being, it's receiving the space it's supposed to receive at the continental level. It's a great encouragement. And whatever we have been doing, I think even when we reference CESA, and it helps us even to reach out to the policymakers and continue to influence policy reforms and making sure that school leadership is part and parcel of the reforms that are happening in each of the contexts. So that's a great encouragement to all of us. And again, it's also, when he was concluding, he said he's inviting us to even, there was a survey that was conducted, the lessons were collected, and they're informing the new design, but we have also the opportunity for us also to inform through the filling of the surveys. So there are a lot of lessons that we heard this morning when we were moving around the different interventions. So I think it's a great opportunity to actually provide our input into that as well. And when we have the strategy adopted at the continental level, then we actually take it to the use. And one other aspect that is being addressed as well is lack of awareness. And it's important that this session is happening. We're being aware, but I think it should even go beyond here to making sure that the end users are able to access that information. And then there's also a way to make it user-friendly in such a way that it informs reforms that are happening at country level in each of the contexts. So really a great appreciation to the presenters. School leadership, I think in the morning, one of the quotes that we heard was leadership as a cause, right? And effects follows. So it's one of the so many objectives, and they could be hidden among so many objectives, but we know very well that it's a glue. And there are a lot of benefits that have been shared with that. But a particular emphasis, again, even for us to look into, is female school leadership. And even in the presentation this morning, we had a lot of great success stories, but less is being done to ensure that female leaders, school leaders are really provided and facilitated to have access to these trainings, given the opportunity, given the benefits basically that are there when we have a female teacher in a classroom, when you have a female head teacher in a school. What kind of benefit do we draw from that? So we need to look at that as well, ensuring that we draw from those benefits and then inform our intervention in such a way that we attract female leaders. There's an issue of making the teaching job attractive, right? I think leadership will contribute towards that. School leadership will contribute towards that. I think one of I think across the presentation this morning, and we heard a lot of anecdotal success stories and the change that is happening, and leadership is playing a key role to ensuring this school environment at the student level, at the teacher level. It helps in terms of addressing dropout, but even turnover as far as teachers is concerned. So something that we need to continue look into as we continue to adapt our interventions. One other aspect that we need also to look at is also leadership at various or several touch points, right? Ensuring that leadership is not only at the level of the head teacher, but it could also cut across even the leaders. Because I think this was one of the points that was raised this morning, that as in much we are trying to making sure that the school leaders are licensed, but it's not about licensing. It's actually to empower them to do the job and what they're supposed to do. And before we get to the licensing, I think we need to make sure that school leadership is about improving the learning environment, is improving the school environment, and then, of course, the licensing follows. I think these are some of the points that we want to take away from this session, and I would like to again remind us that it's important that we continue to input the strategy. There's an invitation that has been sent to us to fill out that survey. So I will take it, I will just make it brief, and then just make a closing unless there is any specific input maybe from the audience. So you want to make a point as we conclude on these reflection sessions. Otherwise, I will turn on the microphone to the moderator.
Thank you so much, Dr. Steve. I will not speak after him. Those are words of wisdom. I fear I may dilute them. So I will just request our participants online to put on their cameras for a photo. Let us put on our videos. Thank you. I can see we're already doing that. Thank you. Thank you so much. Let us put on our cameras. Kindly, we are putting them on and then putting them off. We just want to take a quick group photo as we end the session, kindly. Thank you. Okay, I've stopped saying thank you. Kindly, let us put on our videos just for a quick photo. We're feeling shy today. Thank you, John. Others? We take a picture of John only. Of the names. Okay.
So Yvonne, you have to go fast because some people are smiling and they will be fatigued with their smile.
Thank you so much, Quentin. We can take a picture of you with a wide smile. Thank you so much. So we come to the end of our webinar today. So for those of us who are online, you are free to log off. Thank you once again for participating. We appreciate. Oh, and now the cameras have come back. Should we wait? Yes, now the cameras are here. Please just put them on. Oh, why are you putting them on and off? Okay. So tech team, kindly help us take a photo for the webinar. Thank you so much. Please let them stay on just a little bit longer. Just a little bit longer. Don't put them off. You're good? Okay. Thank you so much. And you have a good afternoon. Allow me to give it
Bye, thanks.
back to Dr.